By the middle of 1941, 18 months into the Second World War, the German public held a very specific image of Adolf Hitler. To millions, he was a flawless military mastermind, an invincible leader guiding the nation from one rapid conquest to the next. The state propaganda machine successfully sold a compelling set of promises. The war would be short, there would be none of the horrific, drawn-out suffering of World War I, and the German people were guided by a perfectly united Nazi high command. But that unity was a complete fabrication. The meticulously crafted image of an unstoppable leadership was about to collide with reality, exposing the deep fractures within the Third Reich. The first major crack in the facade arrived in a bizarre fashion. In the early summer of 1941, Deputy Führer Rudolf Hess, one of the highest-ranking officials in the Nazi Party, secretly boarded a plane and parachuted into a field in southern Scotland, hoping to negotiate a rogue peace deal with Britain. Interrogations quickly revealed his true motivation had nothing to do with peace. Hess was consumed by paranoia. Amidst intense infighting, he felt he was losing his privileged status as Hitler's closest confidant, and he hoped a dramatic diplomatic stunt would restore his prestige. When Hitler found out, he was completely furious. To manage the massive embarrassment, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels scrambled to spin the story. His official explanation to the German public was simple. The deputy Führer had cracked under the pressure of his commitments and gone entirely mad. The excuse was hard to swallow. After all, if the man was insane, why was he second in command? Hess's flight offered the public the very first glimpse that the Nazi high command was an unstable, paranoid nest of self-serving rivals. Shortly after the Hess embarrassment, Hitler made a catastrophic military miscalculation. Driven by an intense racial ideology, he invaded the Soviet Union to secure Lebensraum, or living space, attempting to exterminate and replace the populations of Eastern Europe. The initial advance was terrifyingly fast, but then the Russian winter set in. Temperatures dropped to -32 degrees Fahrenheit. The logistical supply lines froze solid, machinery wouldn't start, and starving German soldiers on the front lines were reduced to eating raw horseflesh. Facing this brutal stall, Goebbels dispatched film crews directly to the freezing trenches. They were instructed to get as far forward as possible, capturing thrilling combat footage to stitch together into exciting, victorious newsreels for domestic theaters. The contrast was deeply lethal. Audiences across German towns cheered at the cinematic illusion of an effortless march eastward, entirely unaware that the actual army was freezing, starving, and slowly bleeding out in the snow. Then, in December 1941, Japanese forces bombed the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. Germany was allied with Japan, but Hitler was under no strict obligation to join the Pacific fight. He isolated himself to ponder his response. His eventual decision was heavily colored by his own racial prejudices, dismissing the United States as a weak, mongrel nation without the stomach for a fight. Hitler confidently and unilaterally declared war on America. That single ego-driven choice turned a grueling European land war into a doomed conflict against an untouched industrial powerhouse. American typewriter factories rapidly converted to machine gun production, and car plants began churning out an endless tide of armored tanks. By late 1942, the German military hit a critical breaking point at the industrial city of Stalingrad. Soviet forces launched a massive flanking maneuver, completely encircling 250,000 German troops. The generals begged for a tactical retreat, but Hitler explicitly forbade it. Enter the head of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring. Leaning into his reputation as an elite commander, Göring arrogantly promised Hitler that his air force could keep the entire trapped army fully supplied with daily airdrops. The man making this promise, however, was no longer a sharp military strategist. Göring's judgment was deeply clouded. He had drifted into severe apathy and was functioning as a heavily dependent morphine addict. Instead of managing fuel logistics or aircraft deployments, Göring was pouring his energy into his personal obsession, looting thousands of priceless cultural artifacts, paintings, and sculptures from across occupied Europe to decorate his private estate. The cost of his distraction was staggering. The trapped men needed 800 tons of supplies a day to survive. The Luftwaffe managed less than 100. Göring's failure led directly to the starvation and total surrender of nearly 100,000 German soldiers. The sheer scale of the collapse at Stalingrad broke the propaganda machine's favorite narrative. It was mathematically impossible for Goebbels to keep pretending the war would be over quickly. So Goebbels engineered a massive rhetorical pivot. Standing before a frenzied audience of 14,000 supporters, he delivered his infamous total war speech, demanding the public abandon their hopes of an easy victory and instead embrace brutal, radical suffering. This marked a core shift in psychological control. The regime stopped selling the enthusiasm of conquest. From this point forward, they relied entirely on terrifying the public with nightmare visions of Soviet retaliation and total annihilation. Far from the front lines, the architect of this disaster was physically deteriorating. Tucked away in his remote bunker complex, known as the Wolf's Lair, Hitler was now a stooped, trembling shadow of his former self. Refusing to interact with generals bringing him bad news, he withdrew completely from military reality. He spent his days in isolation, dependent solely on the company of his girlfriend and his personal doctor. This infographic illustrates his severe chemical dependency. To keep functioning, he relied on a massive daily cocktail of narcotics and sedatives. He simultaneously took heavy barbiturates to sleep, powerful stimulants to stay awake, and an array of painkillers that degraded his nervous system. While the propaganda ministry demanded ultimate sacrifice and absolute clarity from the German people, their flawless military genius was completely severed from the outside world, surviving on a steady drip of heavy drugs and sheer delusion. Eventually, the consequences of those multi-front blunders breached the borders of the homeland. The Axis alliance fractured as Italy fell to the Allies, and American and British aircraft began devastating major German industrial centers, like Hamburg, with relentless day and night firebombing. As the cities burned, the domestic illusion collapsed. For the first time, open public resistance sparked across the country, championed by students in Munich who formed the anti-Nazi White Rose Group to distribute leaflets and paint graffiti demanding freedom. Desperate to maintain control, Hitler made one final domestic pivot. He appointed the fanatical SS leader Heinrich Himmler as Minister of the Interior, effectively replacing whatever public goodwill remained with violent, absolute state repression. Authoritarian regimes built on personality cults and relentless propaganda are inherently brittle. When a leadership isolates itself from the truth, it loses the ability to navigate strategic reality. The empire collapses from the inside, long before the final battles are ever fought.